Thank you very much, Pak Khalid. Thank you for giving me the difficult task of following Surin. It's a very big challenge. I was just going to start out with my comment was, yeah, what he said. And that would be, but actually, towards the end of your presentation, you gave us a challenge. And I think that's where our role should be, is rising to that challenge. I was taking copious notes, and because I felt like I was in a lecture, a very good one. And I've attended many of your speeches and presentations before, and I always take notes because you have a lot of good tidbits, which I'll tweet later. As Pak Khalid mentioned just now, I'm from Indonesia, the largest Muslim population in the world, I guess now. And you said something which I think is something that we have to note. Indonesia has never considered itself as a Muslim country. We're not the Islamic Republic of Indonesia. We're the Republic of Indonesia. We have a majority Muslim population, but we recognize, and I think it was towards the end of Pak Habibie, Pak Watik's presentation, he mentioned Pancasila. He mentioned this united in diversity. It's a motto that we have in Indonesia, but it is what makes, the large Muslim population as a majority. We don't take that majority lightly. I think we have a responsibility, and I think that has to be recognized wherever we are. If we are a majority, I mean, Surin mentioned he's in Thailand. He's coming from a minority, and he's risen to the challenge. But I think the challenge is bigger when you're actually the majority, because how you can be fair and how you can be just as a majority is also something that we have to learn, and we have to. And I think that is the role. How we play our role as a majority plays a very big part in how we develop and flourish as a democracy. This morning in my discussions with our Japanese colleagues, I mentioned in Indonesia, we don't call Muslim Democrats with a small d. That's also significant in Indonesia, because to be Democrat with a capital D, it will be Partai Demokrat, and they lost the election, so we don't want to be Democrat with a capital D either. But again, we often, even in Indonesia, where we're considered to be one of the largest, not just the largest Muslim population now, but also one of the world's largest democracies. So we don't take those adjectives lightly, and we don't take democracy as a given. Now in Indonesia, this year was a test for us. And I think, in a way, we almost failed that test. We were complacent. 16 years of reformasi and having a democracy, and we slightly became complacent. We thought that democracy, once you have it, it's done. And you can just sit back and relax. This year was a testament where you can't think that. We almost, again, in terms of the process, we went through it. But in terms of a lot of things, we almost slipped up and went back to the the old ways, where democracy meant that power was in the hands of a small group of people. And we allowed the parliament to pass a law where it would revoke the power of the people to choose their own regional heads. That was a challenge that we didn't see coming, and because we were complacent. I don't blame, at the time I did blame the president, I blamed everybody, and I realized that we had to blame ourselves, because democracy is also a responsibility. Like I said, it's something that we can't be complacent about. So, kind of going back to Surin's presentation, it's being being able to recognize those challenges and rising up to it. And I like the fact that you mentioned being humble and being tolerant, and not being rigid. One of the things that highlighted our presidential elections this year was the use of Islam as a campaign, black campaign, smear campaign. And again, it's part of democracy, and it's how you rise to that challenge is how our current president, President Jokowi, he didn't fight back. He rose, but in a humble way. He chose to just carry on. He didn't fight back with another smear campaign, which I think is a model that we need to start learning in not just in Muslim Democrats with a small d, I think it's in all democracies, and I think one of the things that we've learned in Indonesia and the role of Muslim Democrats is not just in the hands of the people who are running for political seats, or not the ones that are in their seats, but also the role of the community. And this is where I think in Indonesia it becomes very unique. Not unique, but I think it's a privilege, again, a responsibility of the civil society, of people. We're very fortunate that in 1998, when President Habibie was president, he freed the media. And then again, freedom of expression, freedom of press is something that now we enjoy. We don't always like what they report about us, and they can be completely wrong. But at the same time, there are always avenues and various media that we can use to start the debate, start the discourse. So you had TV stations who would report completely different things from other TV stations, but we were confident that the people of Indonesia were smart enough, and the voters were smart enough to know the difference. So, I'm coming from a think tank, from civil society organization, where we felt that, this is not a decline of democracy. This is us growing. This is the development of a democracy. And I think where the role is, I think there needs to be a definition of where the role is for individuals. As what are you? It's a lot of it is actually how you define yourselves. Are you a Democrat first? Are you a Muslim first? Are you an Indonesian first? Depending on the situation, I guess you can say whatever. But I think it's an all-encompassing role, and I like that you mentioned that being a good Muslim is basically being a good human being overall, and not just in one country, and then not just in one situation, but in everything. I'm going to stop there, and hopefully more wisdom can come from other people as well, as I'm just an observer.
It's kind of interesting listening to Dr. Surin live, and picking up all those wisdoms. But again, I was invited by Pak Khalid last night. I don't know for whatever reason, sitting on this stage with everybody else, but he asked me to represent the liberal point of view, with which I'm not. I'm still an Islamist. I believe that I subscribe to that small d, and not yet to that capital D, because capital D here is the Demokrat Action Party, DAP. I'm not yet a member of DAP. Okay. So, it is quite interesting listening to what you have presented, especially on your question that you imposed to Khatimi. Should Khatimi was a Popperian, he would answer in a very different answer, talking about open society that will contribute towards creation of good people, good community, whatever. And he was very anti-Aristotle. But, you did mention about the ummah, the situation of Muslim countries. One would directly trying to quote Iqbal in his Shikwa and Jawawi Shikwa. His poem, his anonymous poem talking about the situation of ummah, And he was complaining to God of that situation. And you know, the answer, the reply that he received from the conservative, they excommunicated him. Takfir, kata Iqbal sudah kafir. Okay. But it's very interesting when he came out with his Jawabu Shikwa, I mean, reply to the complaint. That's the greatest thing that I think any Muslims, not only Muslim Democrat, small d or capital D, that we should revisit it. Where he was trying to say that don't blame God for the condition of Muslims nowadays. You have to look at the mirror and blame yourself. I mean, he was trying to say that, okay, Moses was sent to Pharaohs, Abraham was sent to Nimrod to fight all the tyrants, you know, and Prophet Muhammad was sent to Abu Lahab, Abu Jahl. But now, you look at the situation of Muslim countries and Muslim nations, you have your own Pharaohs, you have your own Nimrods, and you have your own Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab. So, coming to that, I mean, it's very unfortunate if you look at the situation of Muslims, especially Muslim youth nowadays, we are only left with two options. Number one, you maintain the status quo that most of Muslim countries, maybe apart from Indonesia, yeah, and Malaysia maybe, I don't know, it's not correct to address this kind of audience with that. But anyway, I mean, most of Muslim countries, especially in the Middle East, they're being ruled by tyrants, by dictators, by regimes, by monarchs that never believe in democracy. But they're building their allies and darlings of the so-called democratic power of the West. Saudi Arabia, definitely there's no democracy in Saudi Arabia. Even women are not allowed to drive their car. What more to be, you know, minister or whatever. But again, they are the darling of the United States. You look, the recent coup that happened in Egypt, you know, it's very undemocratic. But again, US recognized them, and you could see a couple of days ago, even EU repertoire came to officiate the Suez Canal, you know, ceremony, whatever. They recognized that. So that's the very first option. You have to acknowledge that there's no room for Muslim Democrats in Muslim countries. You have to acknowledge the status quo, live with the status quo. Or else, you have another choice. I've told Pak Khalid just now that I will try to bring something different. The second choice you have is to join Abu Bakr Baghdadi and the Islamic States. The radical groups from all spectrums, because for them, democracy failed in Muslim countries. Democracy has always been a lip service for the dictators and the regimes, and those regimes are being darlings of the so-called democratic power. So the only way to survive, the only way to bring down those dictators by raising arms and using force, jihad. There's the only two choices. Yes, we can talk about all these, you know, beautiful things from Quran, whatever, but for normal Muslims, looking at the situation, deprivation of Muslims, the current, you know, injustice in all Muslim countries, you only have two options. Either go with this extreme or go to another extreme. But again, let not lose hope. Let not lose hope. I mean, the third option is still there. And I don't know, Pak Khalid told me that I should represent the Ganushist point of view. He didn't come. For whatever reason, he did not come. But anyway, let me represent his point of view. The future is not with political Islam. The future is not going to be with the Islamists. The future is not going to be with Islamic political parties in Muslim countries. That's the fact. Am I right? Wow. A lot of resentment. Wow. Okay, Dr. Zoh respond to me. Shamsul trying to marah, and I can see a lot of past members. I don't know what will happen next. And media, hopefully they will never quote from me. They will never quote me of saying the future is not with political Islam. But what I mean here, yes, let's go back to what Dr. Surin said just now. He said that humility, that is important. Rahmatan lil alamin, but let's not forget one very important hadith, important Prophet Muhammad tradition, when he said, "Innama bu'ithu li utammima makarimal akhlaq." And verily I was sent to complete the good morality. Prophet Muhammad did not say, "I was sent to destroy other civilizations or other wisdom or other moral of conduct, whatever." I'm bringing in, unlike what Islamists always believe that we have to establish or erect justice with the collapse of Jahiliyyah. No, out there are not all Jahiliyyah. And even if you look at the Seerah or the history of Prophet Muhammad SAW, he himself adopted some good values of Jahiliyyah. Shura, for example, mutual consultation. It was another version of Darul Nadwa. Tahaluf nowadays, Islamic Party in Malaysia love to use the word tahaluf siyasi or whatever. The word halaf itself, it was a Jahiliyyah product. So what I'm trying to say here, Allah, too serious, laughing, not all Jahiliyyah are bad. Not all from Jahiliyyah are bad. The same thing nowadays that we are facing, we live with that mantra, the 21st century Jahiliyyah. Everything other than Islam, they are Jahiliyyah. So we must create our own, we could understand that post-colonial mentality that Islamists live during that period and sustained until nowadays within certain group. But again, everything out there not totally Jahiliyyah. A lot of good things. And my late, no, it's not late, but the person that I used to know is no longer there, Dr. Kamal Helbawi. Dr. Kamal Helbawi, whom I used to know, is no longer, he is now. But he always telling us that the current civilization does not belong to the West, does not solely belong to the West. It belongs to the people of the world. And Muslims should have their share in it. The current I really not in favor of Fukuyama's last man standing and obviously that's very Hegelian anyway. Popper does not like Hegelian. Okay, so we're trying to say that the current civilization is the civilization of people of the world. We need to build it together. And it's not solely belong to the West, we also need to revive, like Amartya Sen said, the eastern part of civilization, the Japanese part of civilization, Indian civilization, Islamic civilization. We all have to contribute towards a better world society, better global society. But the condition that we are living with is not promising that. I mean Muslims. Because the hypocrisy of certain powers in the West. At one place they're trying to propagate democracy, another place they are acknowledging their undemocratic allies. So that's coming back. To whom the future with? The future is with the open society. Political Islam, or should we call them Demokrat Islamists? Are they Demokrat Islamists? Yes, Dr. Zhu would say yes, we are Demokrat Islamists. Should not live in exclusivity. The failure of Egyptian FJP, the failure of Islamic parties to rule. I don't want to say the failure of Nahda, because Nahda is still an experiment. But the kind of exclusivity, once you put Islam there in politics, then you are creating more enemies than allies. That is the reality. Unlike the experience of the Turkish AKP, AK Party. You want to play with democracy, you have to toe the rule of the game. You have to submit and really believe in it. You're not using it as a taxi. I still remember the term that been used by the late Wacana. He said that democracy is just like a taxi. You take a taxi, you arrive, and then you say bye-bye. Gule gule, again. That's all. No. Democracy is the zeitgeist. You want to live, you want to contribute towards the civilization, you want to be part of the world society, you have to live with it. And some might say that, does that mean we are negating Islam or whatever? I think this is what Islamic movement has to revisit their position. When they're looking at things, normally they're still in the trap of the politics of identity. They're creating a new identity, exclusive identity, which they want to be different from others. Trying to negate is a zero-sum game, which is not the situation, or which is not the example that being given by Prophet Muhammad SAW. Prophet Muhammad trying to show himself as part of the bigger community. He tried, after the Battle of Kandak, the Battle of the Ditch, on the 5th year of Hijrah, what happened? He did not declare war upon others, but he began to send delegations to be inclusive with others, to invite others to become his allies. So even when he was offered the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, he loved that peace treaty rather than engaging in war. So Islamic movement, I think, has to be more inclusive. I think I engaged in discussion with Rashid Gurushi early this year, where he said that An-Nahdha is at the junction whether they should remain as an Islamic movement or better for them to separate between da'wah movement and political parties. Because for him it doesn't work in such a way. You are becoming a political party, at the same time you want to maintain your Islamic da'wah orientation mentality. It never worked in such a way, especially in this kind of, zeitgeist. So I don't know what's the solution, but Ennahda is still there as a political da'wah party, and they lost the election. Unlike the ARC party, experience is very promising. It's still going on, and I think for Muslim Democrats in Malaysia is something interesting for us to look into. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Khalid. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon to everyone. And Dr. Surin, Pitsuwan. Of course, it was quite an experience, and feel very honoured to have you speak today. Dr. Suyano Ibrahim, who came fresh from Putrajaya Federal Court. And of course, Han Yusan. Thank you very much for actually allowing Muslim Democrats to speak out and up. And I wanted to touch upon those 300 million Muslims that Dr. Surin mentioned earlier on. Half of the people in Asia. And think about how do they view themselves in the bigger scheme of things. Are they feeling victimized? I don't think I can claim to speak on behalf of all the Muslims in Asia, but I think it's important to understand the predicament, the problem, before you actually saw solutions moving forward. And it's interesting to note, because the reality, whether it's mired in poverty, which is a problem in the region, I think all countries will not have a problem with this, recognizing that poverty is an issue for us to grapple with, but also the stark identification in terms of our ranking, whether it's through Freedom House or the Economist Democracy Index. Again, Western indexes. I don't want to claim these are the only indexes that matter, but from the ranking, Malaysia seems to be doing the best in terms of being an Islamic nation. Malaysia at 64 in the year 2012, Turkey 88, Dr. Taha, you have to advise the Prime Minister, we have to improve the ranking. Iran 158 and Saudi 163. Of course, Iran and Saudi are authoritarian by the description, and while Malaysia is a flawed democracy. So I think these rankings, of course, have an impact on us, on policymakers, whether you debate in parliament, on the society, on the non-governmental organizations, or students. Because as Dr. Mazdi mentioned just now, these are fortunately indexes, part of a culture that we belong to, whether we like it or not. And moving from a perspective of a practitioner, we practice tahaluf siyasi. Actually, I will not comment much on Dr. Mazdi because my colleague here, Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad, will respond fully to him. But for me, the problem we have is not so much in terms of a bottom-up support for democracy. In my own personal experience, we come from an opposition coalition that was breathed into life by the people's support. We did not contest as a coalition back in the year 2008. We only decided to come together as a coalition, which is now known as Pakatan Rakyat, because we were given support by the electorate when we denied 2/3 of the incumbent at that particular election. So it was the voters that actually brought us together. And of course, when we came as a coalition, talks were bound of a tahaluf siyasi being practiced. Sometimes there are criticisms internally on the issue, but the point is, it was a bottom-up process. So for me, when thinking about these issues, whether it is through the Egyptian experience, because the last time when Penang Institute organized a talk, we had Tariq Ramadan, who was perhaps the first and foremost critique of the Arab awakening. He refused to term it as a successful revolution then. And it seemed that in every movement, first, Muslim Democrats, having overlapping consensus on the basic issues, whether it's social justice, whether it's rule of law, these are all points we can agree on, common denominators. But when the bottom, the people actually express support for such principles of justice and such values in terms of institutionalizing democracy, it seemed that leadership fails them. So when Dr. Surin mentioned the points, first, tolerance. All fine and dandy, everyone loves tolerant society. Everyone loves to have an engaging discourse. But my issue is, and I would like perhaps to bring this forward, the need through legislation, through institutions, to ensure that tolerance is the name of the game. Because it's not just about society espousing tolerance of one another. It's actually, we need safeguards, whether it's through legislation, whether it's through the various religious institutions we have in Malaysia, and whether it's through the government-sponsored non-governmental organizations, who I'm not sure are invited or came today. The ones that are here are not sponsored by the government. But my point is, these are the legitimate institutions that can sort of provide certain direction with regards to a tolerant or creating a tolerant society. And when you have a suggestion, we were discussing very seriously about the need of a harmony bill. This was discussed between members of parliament, brought by the Attorney General's chambers, a part of it, to be passed in parliament, to ensure that you actually foster unity against the wreckage or the destruction wreaked by the Sedition Act. Dr. Zul and myself, we belong to parties that keep falling victimized by this act. But the issue is legislation. So for me, through Egypt, the counter-revolution, what happened? Without that leadership, without the safeguards, whether it is through legislation, whether it is through institution, you have an entire generation committed to the principles of justice, equality, of democracy, left to be blown to smithereens. And to have that spirit being built again would be, I'm not to say impossible, but difficult. So I wanted to know it, because for me, these are clear-cut demands that we must make. We saw a real-life example when Pak Wati presented through former President Habibie. 17 months. I basically tweeted to the Prime Minister. I don't know if he reads all his tweets, but I said, in 17 months, former President Habibie managed to abolish the permits required for media publications. I've been trying for some years now, but my bill never gets discussed in Parliament. But the issue is the Prime Minister has not done this. So if you have real life examples, what was done in Indonesia, which is what we're enjoying, or at least from afar today, it is not something that it should be left for discussions between communities, between groups alone. It has to be something that must be brought to the mainstream, adopted by the government, and followed through by political will and actual execution. So I love the fact that we have been very philosophical, because in Malaysia, one of the reasons for the decline in education, because many philosophy is not being taught enough in universities. Those are not my words, these are the words of Professor Lee Hwa On of University Malaya, leading the charge against the Sedition Act in Malaysia. But he says, this philosophy, even in terms of critical thinking, even understanding, the basic word, tolerance, it encapsulates so much in our effort to move forward as a great nation, kinder, gentler, greater Malaysia. So I think, for me, what I would add on to what Dr. Surin excellently presented is actually the need for safeguards to exist in a country through legislation. And I hope, after Ganushi's experience, you must understand that was our last example, a shining example, beacon of hope. And then my concern is the practitioners of democracy, or those who term themselves as Islamists, will say, yeah, Ganushi did it right, but he didn't win the elections. So we might as well, shout and do it wrong. What kind of words, yeah? But I think, therein lies the challenge to actually understand, yes, Ganushi did it right. Because in the long term, you have to see the outcome, you have to see the institutions that have been unearthed. Because we're not looking for the purpose of winning elections after elections, although everyone wants to be the AK party, everyone wants to win elections. But I think we were looking for more statesmen. And I hope that Muslims here, non-Muslims here can answer and heed the call and understand that so much as we should believe in certain precepts and ideals of democracy, much more needs to be done to pressure our own governments to provide these safeguards so that we emerge more tolerant, more humble, and able to survive and withstand the challenges, especially from the eyes of the 300 million Muslims living in Asia.